Hi, this is Lenny Pfeffer, President of the Dorchester County Council, and you're listening to the Maryland Association of Counties Conduit Street Podcast, the source for news and notes on Maryland's policy and politics.
And welcome to the Conduit Street Podcast. I'm your host and producer, Chantel Malcolm Lim, joining you here with Michael Sanderson for a very special podcast episode.
Thanks, Chantel, for having me. And I really like how this worked out, to be honest. So I think this is good content for our listeners.
So a little bit of background. At the MACo Winter Conference, of course, we had dozens of great sessions and workshops, but we got a lot of feedback on one session in particular, the Friday general session on education, where you interviewed our State Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Carey Wright.
Right. So we had a lot of people in the room. That we do an education topic at every one of our conferences. We make that a general session. So rather than it being like one breakout up against 5 or 6 different things up and down the hallway, we do a sort of general plenary session talking about education topics. And this conversation with Dr. Wright, I think went really well. We got to cover an awful lot of ground, and she's also a great sport. I confess that we had talked through things that we wanted to get to, and some things I wanted to ask about. So she wasn't going to be completely surprised. But then I know that my model of questioning ends up being like I interrupt her flow a little bit here. When I don't understand something, I want to dig in and say, wait, what does that mean exactly, and that sort of thing. Yeah. So, but she played ball with my sort of sophomore level questions about things, and like picked right back up with the stuff she wanted to get into and explain. So it was a really good rundown of the vision and education policy for sort of an invested consumer, but not necessarily an expert. I thought it was great.
Yeah. And I think that's just active listening for sure. And, while everybody is definitely invested in education, not everyone speaks the language. So I kind of like this idea of her digging a little bit deeper here and there. It was really helpful. And you know what, Michael, along the way, the audience got to hear a tiny bit about you. So get this, guys. Truly a MACoCon moment. The night before at our inaugural dinner, MACo honored Michael for 30 years of service with MACo. And this was so amazing. There was a standing ovation that was longer than any standing ovation I've ever seen. Forget the Oscars, forget the Grammys. This was it. This was the moment.
Well, I'm not sure about all that, but it was nice to be recognized by our leadership and by our members and so forth. And honestly, I don't mind that a fair number of people commented they didn't think I looked old enough to have been working at MACo for 30 years, and that was a running joke was also mildly flattering. So I'll take that, a little pick me up. That's nice.
We all agree. So. So we're just going to share the audio from that session, not the 30-year session.
No.
Education session. We're going to share that here on the podcast feed, and we hope you get as much out of it as our conference attendees did. And special thanks to Dr. Wright and her team for agreeing to let us share the episode like this, and we hope you guys enjoy. We know you will enjoy. We know.
Good morning. Welcome to the MACo Winter Conference session, a fresh take on the future of education, a conversation with Dr. Carey Wright. I'm Sarah Sample. I'm on the MACo policy team. And at this time, I'm going to go ahead and shout out our early bird prize winner. And this is somebody who gets in the room early. And for that reason, we can only assume is very excited to engage in the content. So for this session, I've got left side, my left, fourth row back, an individual sitting on the aisle with a maroon jacket on their lap. I'm going to bring this over to you very shortly, but a round of applause for getting here early. All right, so before we get started, please take a moment to silence your cell phones, your noise-making devices, your watches, anything that's going to buzz. Now, it is my honor to introduce MACo's Executive Director, Michael Sanderson, who will moderate this conversation for us today. Michael has been with the association for 30 years and celebrated his 30th anniversary this week. So, round of applause for that.
Exactly right.
He began working on the policy team covering a range of issue areas, but with a specific focus on education from well before the blueprint for Maryland's future. So please join me in welcoming Executive Director Michael Sanderson.
Oh, good morning, everybody. Sounds like the mic is good. I'm glad to have you all here this morning. And for many of you who were at the dinner last night, I had the awkward opportunity to be recognized for a round number of years of service, which suits me okay. It's not really my nature, but that was fine. I will say that I love getting feedback. I mean, some people say, I love how MACo's working. I love some things that you've done. I love some innovations that have happened during your time there. But the people I like best are the ones who came to me and said, when did they hire you? Were you 12? And I was, oh, that's the good stuff. So I'm very delighted by that. I'm also delighted to be here this morning with Dr. Wright. We are, MACo, like just about every organization like ours, we're good at putting 3 or 4 speakers at the front of the room, and everybody gets their 10 to 12 minute windows, and then you leave a little tiny bit at the time at the end for Q&A, that sort of thing. And I think those work well, and I think that's still fine for it to be the backbone of a conference. But from time to time, we like to shake it up. And Dr. Wright came and spent some time with some county leaders some months ago, and we set aside sort of an hour's worth of time to hear your thoughts about education, but about mission and about goals and so forth. And multiple people in that room said, we gotta bottle this. So we're going out of our way to do something a little bit different. Now, if you're gonna have one speaker for an entire window of time, she better be a rock star.
The pressure's on.
The pressure's on. No, we are delighted to have you with us, and we're going to do this sort of as a fireside chat sort of conversation a little bit. I want to wrap up a number of things that we agreed to talk through and give time for some questions from the audience. But let's dig into some things that we want to get into, and sure. I'm interested in starting with you and what makes you tick. So tell us, you don't get to be a leader in education without cutting some chops. So tell us a little bit about you and your path to here.
Well, I've been in education my entire career. Started out as a teacher in Prince George's County, and then moved to Howard County, was a teacher, administrator, director of special ed and student services. Then moved to Montgomery County and was associate superintendent of special ed and student services. And then was hired by Michelle Rhee in DC, PS, to be her chief academic officer. And from there is where I got the call from the search firm to wanting to know if I would be interested in being a state superintendent in Mississippi, which had never been on my radar. So I followed the advice that I give people that I mentor, which is be open to opportunity, because you never know what those opportunities are going to be. And so when I applied for the job, a lot of my friends said, "You're doing what? You're going where? Have you ever even been to Mississippi?" And I said, "No." "Do you know anybody down there?" I said, "No." And they said, "But you're going by yourself?" And I was like, "Yeah, I am." And so I took a leap of faith and followed my own advice, and that's how I landed there. And then retired from there and came back here, opened a consulting firm, doing what I love to do, which is working with districts that are struggling and coaching other state chiefs, and then got a call if I would be interested in this job. Right. So that's how I landed in this chair.
So not everybody realizes your path was back to Maryland rather than, through a pin on the map or that sort of thing. So
it was like coming back home.
Right.
Yeah.
But you already had some groundwork here.
I did.
And one of your stops was focusing on special education.
Yes.
And you've kept that as a priority among the things
Absolutely.
that you focused on.
Yeah, I supervised special ed for 10 years of my career, and But I've got to say, even as a principal, that those students were always ones that I really felt we needed to look out for more than others, because their needs are different than other children. And so I was one of those nerdy principals that sat in every single IEP meeting, because I believe that whoever came across your desk at those meetings were the children that really needed your attention. And as a principal, you also got a feel for, that's a number of children that have been referred for written expression, or number of children that are being referred for behavior, whatever it was. But then it helped make me, I think, a better principal in terms of then turning those decisions into something positive for children.
Right. So is there a motto over the door? Do you have sort of words to live by that you and your leadership team sort of think of as a mission? Is, what drives you, that sort of thing?
Well, I am a big believer in servant leadership. And I believe that even regardless of what position I have, but as a state chief, I believe that our job at the department is to be in service to our teachers and our leaders and our families across the state. It's very easy for an agency to become very compliant driven, and there's a place for compliance, but that's not what moves the needle. What moves the needle is helping others who are out there in the classrooms where the magic happens each and every day. And I'm a big believer in building capacity in people. I think that everybody comes to the job wanting to do their very best, and some people walk through those doors and already have those skill sets. But I also believe that others can be brought up to and taught those skill sets. So I think the two aspects of my career, I think of building capacity, helping build capacity in others, and also and being a servant leader. Feel very strongly about that.
I think I hear that a lot from folks who make it through leadership within our organization and serve back in the county commissioner and council members and executives and so forth. The idea that the org chart doesn't have you on top, it has the people you serve on top, your residents, exactly your students, and so forth.
That's exactly
I think it's a healthy mentality, be looking upwards, not just downwards.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And people in the field want to do the very best for children. And so part of our job is to say to them, what do you need? What help do you need to do that? How can the department help you in that area? And so we've got to have that feedback loop. You've got to be listening. You can't just this cannot be a top down. It's never for me ever been a top down. I believe in distributive leadership. I believe in hiring the very best people and then getting out of their way and letting them do their job. I am not a micromanager. I can't stand being micromanaged myself. And so, I just believe that you hire good people and then you let them do the very best that they can do, but turning them around and focusing them on the people that we serve. Like that to me, when I'm looking to hire somebody, it's a belief in children. So that's first and foremost. If you want to come and work for me, you have got to believe in your heart of hearts that every single child can learn and excel and achieve at high levels. I don't care where they live. I don't care what race they are. I don't care whether they're a disability, multilingual learner, it doesn't matter. Children in poverty, all children can learn and excel at high levels. Some we need to help more than others, but that's the first belief. And then the second belief is making sure that that we are doing the best that we can to improve the lives of children, and then helping teachers and leaders in that process.
So let's talk about the Maryland task. So you get this opportunity, and I think Maryland political people, we're really big into Maryland, right? I've heard this many times. Like we all like to wear the Maryland flag, and we love our Old Bay and all these things, right? But I hear this a lot in political circles, that you're sitting before a committee and some regional vice president sits and testifies at the Maryland hearing, and they say, well, this is working just great in Oregon. And there's, the lights flash up around the room. They're like, man, this is not Oregon. This is Maryland. We need a Maryland solution. Yeah. So even with the benefit of having been in a comparable role in a different state, different in a variety of ways, you come to this with a certain set of tools and expectations. So tell us a little bit about okay, you get the keys to the car, you pop open the hood. What do you see in the Maryland system that looks familiar, that looks different? Like what are your first impressions as we're in the midst of some big things?
So first and foremost, I think when I was asked to take this job, even in the interim role before I applied for it, what concerned me the most, particularly having spent most of my career in Maryland, vast majority of my career in Maryland, was the decline in student achievement over the past decade. And that to me was alarming. As a principal, and I was a principal for a number of years in Howard County, each year when the NAEP results came out, we were bumping heads with Massachusetts as to who was going to be number one. It was going to be Maryland, or was it going to be Massachusetts? And to see the decline, when you're looking at a 47% proficiency rate in English language arts, and you're looking at a 27% proficiency rate in mathematics. And this is Maryland. And so for me, it was, so you start looking at, you look at the assessment. I talked to a number of superintendents. That was one thing that I had heard, that the superintendents had really been kind of left out of the loop for a number of years. And you cannot do this job without having a strong relationship with superintendents. So it's really, I spent a lot of time listening and talking, meeting with people, trying to build relationships. I'm a firm believer that you build relationships with people and let them get to know you and what you stand for, but you also get to learn their needs. And so looking at that, and then looking at an accountability system, this is a story I've told quite often. I arrived in October of 23, and the tail end of it, and our first board meeting was in December that I attended. And we were producing our, I'm going to call them the accountability results, or the report card results, the STAR systems that were being awarded. And the director of assessment was sitting there, and the statement that she made was very clear. She said, we have 76% of our schools that are rated 3, 4, or 5 stars. And we have a 47% proficiency rate in reading and a 27% proficiency rating in math. And I'm like, there's not an equal sign there. So it made me wonder, maybe we need to take a look at our accountability system. So I put together a group of people, 30 very diverse people from all walks of life and experiences, on an assessment and accountability task force. And I said, let's take a look at what we have and come up with some recommendations. And they worked, the Center for Assessment, which is a nationally known gold standard organization out of New Hampshire, chaired that. And over a series of months, really did a good job of looking at what are we really holding schools and districts accountable for, and why is nobody paying attention to it? That was what was alarming to me, that it had happened, but nobody really recognize that it happened. And so to me, it's like, well, we can turn the ship around, but we've got to figure out what are we doing that we should keep doing, and what should we be doing differently. And that's one of the reasons I leaned in very heavily with the science of reading, because it's a research-based piece that goes with reading and teaching children how to read. And it was very successful, when in my tenure during Mississippi. I mean, we literally moved from 50th to 21st in the nation in reading. And it was not a miracle. Let me be very clear about that. People refer to it as the Mississippi Miracle. It was a marathon. It was a 9-year marathon. And, but you can do this work, but it's hard work, day in, day out, sticking with a strategy that you know that works. I'm a firm believer in research-based work, because there's research behind it. I'm not one of those to throw something up against the wall and see what sticks. When you're dealing with children's lives, and I don't use that lightly, you are dealing with children's lives every single day, whether you're sitting in this chair or whether you're sitting in a school. And this is not just a job we do. This is, to me, this is a mission. This is a calling. Parents are entrusting their children to us. And so we've got to make sure that whatever we're doing with children in classrooms, they're going to be better off today than they were yesterday. And then we just keep building on that.
So an element there that I find interesting is, I think Maryland for a long time, we were in that, along with Massachusetts, like battling for a very top spot in some in some gradings of state education systems that looked at a variety of factors, but there was always an element there where spending on education was, it's a reasonable proxy for your overall commitment to the mission and so forth. And there's cost of living differences, and we get all that. But we heard the governor last night talking big picture about the state budget, and I'll paraphrase rather than quote, but he said words to the effect of, just because you're spending more doesn't necessarily mean you're getting better outcomes. And the idea that we need to look at the way accountability through actual outcomes rather than outputs rather than inputs, I think strikes a chord with an awful lot of people. I don't mean this as a critique of the education system, but it's tough. It's tough when it's your calling and it's your mission to look that critically and say, these do not equal. They don't end up, and that makes sense. So.
Well, it's the thing that I've always viewed about budget is that it's not always about asking for more money. It is about looking at the money that you have and are we spending it and putting it where it needs to be right now. I'm a big believer in zero-based budgeting. And so each year to step back and say, let's start from scratch. Let's take a look at what we're spending our money on. Are we getting the results that we need? If not, why not? Do we need to continue spending the money in that way, or do we need to redirect the money in another way? And to me, that just makes good business sense. The fact that we're in education, it is a business, but we don't have an endless pot of money. So when you now are facing the structural deficit that we're facing, it calls on you to step back and say, okay, we thought this was how this was going to work, and now we're in a position that we're having to re-examine. So of all of the things that we have in the blueprint, which are some amazing things, I mean, let me be very clear, starting with early childhood. I mean, the most successful thing that we're looking at right now is child care scholarship. I mean, we've got more kids getting on child care scholarship and more families being able to go back to work because of it. But right now, the model that currently exists is simply not sustainable financially. So we've got to figure out what we're going to have to do about that, not eliminate it, but how do we redirect some money toward that? And another example is community schools. Doing amazing work. Some of the best performance that we're getting out of high poverty schools are our community schools. But right now we've got 619 community schools. That's out of 1,400. And so if you're talking about the money that goes into them, whether it's the personnel grant for the coordinator and the nurse, or whether it's the per pupil spending, that just keeps going up. And when you're looking at, you get this amazing thing in community schools, but you can't sustain that level of spending. Collaborative time is another thing that we've heard a lot about. I was a principal. I know the power of using good collaborative time. I've seen it work in teams. But when you're looking at a teacher shortage, and you're talking to superintendents who are saying, this is going to require an additional 15,000 teachers if we keep it at this rate. It's not that you want to do away with collaborative time, but how do we then pause some of these things to think about redirecting some of the money? These are all conversations I think that we need to be having. And it's not that we're trying to do away with something. But if everything is a priority, nothing is. And that's another philosophy of mine, to be honest with you. Not everything can be the same priority. So you've got to step back and say, what are our priorities? What is going to be in the best interest of teachers and leaders and children? And then how do we make that happen within the budget that we've been given? Not asking for more money, but redirecting some money.
Right. So I know, we're a few years into the implementation of the big blueprint plan, which had a number of different components. If you were at the dinner last night, you heard the governor speak about collaborative time among some other things. And I think some of those pieces are tough to put together, but I think you just said them nicely. There's a cart and horse matter there, that you can embrace the idea that expanding collaborative time for teachers, make sure teachers have time outside of the classroom so they can sharpen the saw and work on curriculum and develop their own skills. That's a good goal, and it needs to be in the plan. But the only way you can have each teacher spend more time outside of the classroom is by having an extra wave of teachers to fill those spots while they're away.
That's exactly right.
And when we can't fill the teaching seats we have today, common sense tells you, okay, that may need to be a goal for a couple years later when we can try and solve the crisis we have just getting folks in place.
Exactly.
It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And I think that, we're trying to do that through a variety of initiatives where, like the Grow Your Own programs that you hear about, trying to get paraprofessionals or people that are changing careers to come into teaching. And I think part of what the Blueprint's done is by raising the salary on that and creating a career ladder is a way to do that and to draw people into our state. Because right now we are importing more teachers than we are growing in our current programs. So if you know that, then what are we doing to incentivize teachers from other states to come here?
Right. And I don't think there was ever a reasonable expectation that happens in 18 months.
No.
You can't put up the sign and say, we welcome all the teachers in Pennsylvania, come on down. This is the land of milk and honey. It's not going to work like that. But you'd like to think that over a practical generation of time, you can transform those expectations. You want those promising students to be, some of them who are thinking, I'm going to go to finance, I'm going to Wall Street. You want some of them to say, I want to be a chemistry teacher, right? I mean, wonderful change in mindset that's among the goals that we have in Maryland to try and trigger that.
Absolutely.
So your station is a little bit complicated. You have the Board of Education,
Correct.
And then you also lead a whole agency, and you have a leadership team on the management, oversight, administration, guidance, and so forth. So you get to look up and down both on that front. So I want to mention, I guess the state board just recently adopted some policy priorities.
Yes,
Can you let our audience know a little bit about what's on their list and what you see coming short term as a result of that?
Well, they just approved the literacy policy. It's a pre-K through grade 3 literacy policy. I see our kindergarten teacher there. And very proud of that. It went through a number of iterations. We had a lot of input on that because one of the things that we are trying to ensure is that all of our districts and all of our teachers are using the science of reading to teach children to read. Because if you can get children to read by the end of grade 3, that solves a whole lot of problems, moving beyond grade 3. There is a math policy that is coming to the board in January for its first iteration. And so that we're looking at math pathways, we're looking at course sequencing, we're looking at how do we support learners across K-12 in terms of children that may be struggling, but also, which is new coming to us, is, and it's been a push of mine, I must admit, how do we accelerate some children's learning? I mean, you've got little ones coming into school that are incredibly precocious. So why would you just, assume that if you've got a third grader, they need to be in third grade math? There are children that are coming into kindergarten that already have it down pat, right? So how are we helping to accelerate those children through their elementary years and even into their high school years, and to look at some of the courses that are being offered? In December, we did take the recommendations from the Assessment and Accountability Task Force to the board. That is going to be coming up for discussion again. There were a lot of really good suggestions on ways to change the way we're holding schools and districts accountable. Right now, there is a component called growth, and when you're looking at children growing from one year to the next, but it's not nearly strong enough for the number of children that we have. And I don't think that we're rewarding, if you will, schools for really growing children as much as we should be. And to me, that's a mark that we need to be looking at, is how many kids are really actually growing. And there's ways to do that in our model. We also, I think, need to be looking more at some of our high schools in terms of apprenticeships, CTE programming, industry recognized credentials, along with advanced placement, international baccalaureate, dual credit, dual enrollment. So there's other ways to build that into the accountability model. I'm a firm believer that accountability drives behavior. So what you hold people accountable for, they start looking at. For example, we had in a model in Mississippi, we had in our accountability model, we were looking at the growth of the bottom 25%. Well, we'd been 50th for decades. So that was where a lot of our kids were. But it's not just enough to say it's who's there. Like behind every data point is a face. And if you don't know who that face is, then you're not going to know what to do to that particular child to help them. So it's those kinds of things that the board's starting to look at now in terms of accountability. Safety is another one. After what had occurred here in the state in 2 different instances where children who had been arrested or accused of some very, very reportable offenses and superintendents, I think, were caught off guard about that. We had to look at what are some of the holes that we have in reporting structures around not only just the judges and the state's attorneys, but the Department of, DJS, the juvenile services. How are all of these people communicating or not to ensure that our superintendents have the information that they need, our principals have the information that they need in order to make a good decision about where to place children. My guess is, in the most recent case that we had, if that superintendent had known that, the odds of that superintendent or principal putting them in a comprehensive high school would probably not have been made. My guess is, having been a principal. And so it's those kinds of things that we have to really be thinking around. It's around safety. It's around education. It's around access and opportunity. That is very much on our board's radar, making sure that all children, regardless of their zip code, have access and opportunity that all children have in terms of learning opportunities. And so it requires due diligence. But it also requires getting a lot of feedback from your superintendents. And that's one thing that even with the budget, just to give you an example, we did 3 what I call deep dives, because I kept hearing from the superintendents the struggles that they were having with some of the blueprint implementation.
Right.
And so I thought, well, the only way I'm going to really know what that looks like is to sit down with the superintendent and their CFO. And we did. And over a 3-hour period of time. And I mean, we were in the weeds with 3 different superintendents in 3 very different areas. And it was like, oh, that's what you're talking about. So then when I am better informed, having listened to them, then I can be a better advocate for what they're trying to say that needs to change. And so, but you can only do that if you are having those feedback loops. So starting in the spring, I'm also creating a principals advisory committee, a student advisory committee, and a teacher advisory committee. And I think it's important then to create those kinds of feedback loops for people that are actually on the ground, and to hear from them what their experiences are and what we at the department can do to solve some of their challenges.
So avoid some of the ivory tower problem that can sometimes happen. There's nice tall building, but the students are out there.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Okay. So a couple things in there I want to expand on a little bit. I think the challenge of accountability is maybe most acute in education. I mean, the public sector, we have our ways of enforcing accountability. A lot of it, candidly, ends up being through the budget and funding. And if the park department comes to the county leaders and says, give us this investment and we want to transform this park, and then you come back 2 years later and you say, well, it just didn't land. You had this vision for what the park could look like and the people it would serve, but as it turns out, we've missed the mark. Then the park department says, well, we want to do our next project. You say, well, we're not sure we're ready to make that commitment because the last one didn't work so well. I love parks. I think park and recreation is a part of our quality of life. But there's something different about the everyday ongoing mission of educating the students. And the notion of we have this school that's having numbers that have us frustrated, or outcomes that have us frustrated, or this system that's giving us these frustrations, the idea of let's put fewer dollars into those areas that are having poor outcomes, sounds backwards. I mean, to almost anybody, even fans of accountability would say, well, let's not have 3 years worth of kids suffer for missteps in the past. So how do you thread that needle? I'm sure there's not a perfect answer, but how do you thread that needle with accountability without retracting, right?
Well, you've got to understand the issues that they're facing. I think that's the biggest thing. I think before you start making decisions around what they do and do not need to be doing, you need to find out what's working and what's not working. Right. And where are the struggles? I mean, if you've got a school that has a number of inexperienced teachers, then maybe they need more professional learning or more professional development. That's something that we can offer. It doesn't necessarily mean that schools have to spend more money on it. Or if they're struggling with their reading scores or not, then what does that reading instruction look like? How do we help that principal become a better and stronger instructional leader? That is the one thing that we are starting under the blueprint is principal training. And we've really designed this training around what does it take to be a strong instructional leader in a school and to be able to help teachers that are learning. And we also need to be thinking about how do we get our communities more involved? How do we get our families more involved? And not just on parent night, not just on, parent, conference time, but actually get them involved in the learning aspect of their children when they're at home. And so those are things that I think that we're constantly looking at. But it's not about necessarily always about throwing more money at it.
Right.
It may be throwing a different strategy at it. Right. And can we work with a group of schools together to do that kind of professional learning? It doesn't have to be school by school. Right. It can also be cluster by cluster or inviting particular schools in for a certain kind of professional learning. Right. So I think it really does vary. It varies at an elementary school. It's different than a middle school. It's different than a high school. What does the whole master schedule look like? I mean, that's one thing that I've really been talking a lot about. How are we spending our time in schools? How much time is being spent on reading? How much time is being spent on mathematics? Are we actually offering science and social studies in our schools? Those are the kinds of things that when you start digging in, you uncover a lot of things if you're looking at how time is being spent.
And one more thing, you've used a term that I heard a couple of times, the science of reading.
Yes.
And I'm not sure the full audience knows so can you unpack that a little for us? Will. So what's the science of reading as a tool?
Most people will say, oh, that's phonics.
Phonics, right.
Everybody says that. Science of reading.
I didn't want to say phonics, but I was thinking phonics. Right?
And phonics is an aspect of the science of reading. So the science of reading has 5 components. And phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, how well children read, comprehension, vocabulary development. Right. And I will add to that knowledge building, because I think it's very important for some children come to school with all kinds of experiences, even though they may not be able to recognize and pronounce the words, they have the vocabulary behind it because they've been exposed to lots of things. Other children don't. So we have to build their knowledge in those areas that we may not have. So it's a very explicit way of teaching children to read. You don't teach children to read by guessing. Let me be very clear. Let me give you the perfect example. When you're little, you've got all the picture books, right? So you open up the picture and you're reading to this child, and this child sees they're starting to learn to read. And they come to the word HORSE. And they see the picture. And the child says, pony. And the teacher goes, oh, keep reading. So comprehension-wise, they may get that. But if you then took the word HORSE and said, now read this, it doesn't start with a P. So you've got to teach those sounds and symbols. They mean something. Reading is the key to every other subject in the world. And think about it when you pick up your newspaper or you pick up a magazine or you pick up a book. I'm always intrigued when I come across a word that I've not seen in print, even today. And what do I fall back on? I fall back on those same skills, sound, symbol, break it into syllables, those kinds of things in order to make sense of the word. Children need to be able to do that. We do that. All of you do that as readers. You do that intuitively now. You don't even think about it when you come across a word because that's what you've learned. But if you don't learn those sound symbols, then because by the time you get to 3rd grade, those pictures disappear in a book pretty quick. And then it's all print. From then on, it's all print. So you have got to know sounds, symbols, and how to comprehend, how to break words down, and you need to build up children's vocabulary. Because children can use a word like fantastic, but if you showed them the word, they wouldn't know how to read fantastic yet. But it makes it that much easier when you're building on their vocabulary to teach them how to read. But it's explicit. It's very explicit.
I think parents understand reading as like that critical step to everything, in a way that's probably different than educators, but it's every bit as important, I think. I will say just a tiny little thing. There's a certain joy I get when my children can't pronounce a word. They see a word and it's familiar to them, but they don't know how to pronounce it. And you can be tempted to think that that's a bad moment, but it's a wonderful moment because they discovered that word by reading rather than hearing. And that's a great thing. Having kids who read on their own and find something that's challenging enough to have a 4-syllable word that's challenging for a 12-year-old, it's a great moment, actually.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Okay, so let's talk about stuff that we're, policy changes that we're in the midst of. You've already made some allusions to elements of the blueprint and so forth, but that's on everybody's mind for a variety of reasons. But we have a structural budget problem, and that's driving consideration of everything that's among our fiscal priorities. But at the same time, we're at the right time in a decade-long rollout to be thinking about the pieces that are following according to form and the pieces that aren't. And I don't mean any slight. I was actually on the ground level for the work groups and so forth. I attended literally every single meeting of the Kerwin Commission and all their different breakdowns and so forth. So we have a lot of folks who spent a lot of time to sort of envision this plan. No surprise at all that a few years in, and especially the things the world has gone through over the last 3-5 years, that we're not in exactly the place that the pieces of paper suggested we would be. So do you have some thoughts just on where we are and, like expand on that a little bit if you can?
Well, anytime you're into implementation, you've got to always take the time to reflect. I mean, I think that just goes without saying. I mean, you can develop, the board developed a strategic plan, I think maybe 3 years ago. And we're now looking at it again, because I'm looking at it with a different set of eyes in terms of what are some of the elements that are missing, and what are some of the elements that we still want to keep. And I think it's that way with any kind of plan that you roll out. You've got to take time to reflect, to say what's working, what's not working, and where are we going to, I'm going to call it, get the biggest bang for our buck. In other words, if you're, whatever it is that you're trying to get accomplished, there's a lot of different moving parts inside the blueprint. And you've got to step back then and say, which of these do we really think we want to double down on? You're talking to an early childhood, person here. So to me, pillar 1 is huge, because if we get it right with pre-K and K, we solve a lot of the world's problems, to be honest with you, much later down the stream. But there's other times that you've got to be looking at all these other different aspects of it. I've mentioned community schools. I've mentioned collaborative time. We were talking about even special ed, the weights that are going in under Pillar 4, whether it's for multilingual learners or students in poverty. I mean, you've got to look at it pillar by pillar to say, what do we need to keep and what do we need to change? And I think that involves a broad discussion. And I think that's where we are right now. I listened to the governor last night, and, there's a lot of wonderful things. And I think he acknowledged that in the blueprint. But looking at a $2.7 billion deficit, I mean, it's like you raised your kids. My girls are adults, and I'd say it's kind of like the common checkbook, right? If you got $100 in your checkbook and you're out shopping, and I said to the girls, and you see this $200 coat, are you going to be able to buy the $200 coat with $100 in your checking account? And the answer is no. Okay, then what do we got to do? So you may have to save up more money or find a cheaper coat. So to me, it's just a practical kind of thing that we do all the time, and with our own personal budgets, but now it's with the state budget. But now you're also looking at it through the lens of education. and what's going to impact children's lives and what's going to impact teachers' lives. And so I think for me, it's looking at it, every single aspect of the blueprint and deciding, is it working the way we want it to work? And even if it is working the way we want it to work, just like Child Care Scholarship, we cannot sustain that amount of projection. We're looking at projections in Child Care Scholarship, depending on whether we keep it the same way it is, that could end up costing over $700 million a year.
Right.
So is Child Care Scholarship worth it? Absolutely, it's worth it. But do we then need to step back and say, maybe we put a cap on the number of kids that get Child Care Scholarship? So maybe we limit enrollment. I mean, we've got to be talking about solutions rather than just saying we can't touch that and we can't touch that and we can't touch that and we can't touch that, because that's not going to solve our deficit. So I guess I'm just happy to be a part of the conversation. And I think everybody's leaning into this with very good intentions. But something's going to have to give. And so we just need to be thoughtful about what that is and how we go about doing that.
Right. I think we're all around the same maypole here. And even though you came into this leadership role in Maryland with sort of the architecture of this plan in place, there's no denying that the implementation level and the refinements that probably lie ahead are going to be a really big part of its success. And the list of goals that the blueprint embraces are really meritorious. We're in the midst of struggles of how to get there. The state can see theirs coming. A number of our counties are already there.
Correct.
You've been out in the field with some of the school systems and up hip deep in spreadsheets and paperwork and looking at faces and let's come to this school and this class and actually see what's happening here. So you've sort of gotten in the middle of all this, and I think that's helpful. So we've got the legislative session coming, we've got budget considerations coming, and so forth. You're going to have a front row seat, and more than that, you're going to, you're one of the circles in this, the circles in this is the circus to bring it all together. But it's a big task, but it's one that you certainly seem up to. I mean, everybody likes to hear you're embracing the vision, but also being really practical at the same time.
You've got to be. I mean, I just, obviously I'm a huge education advocate, or I wouldn't be in this chair, right? And I believe in doing everything that we possibly can for all children and making and not using poverty as an excuse. I mean, I say that because in Mississippi is the state with the highest rate of poverty in the nation. And yet when our NAEP scores came out in 2019 and again in 2022, the NAEP scores in Mississippi, our fourth graders in poverty outperformed all of their counterparts across the nation. So it can be done. You just got to stick with it, but you've got to stick with the right strategies. And I think, to me, you can't come to the table and not be willing to negotiate. That, to me, is just a part of our job. Our job is to say, we want the best for our children. We want outcomes to turn around in Maryland. We want to be able to help our teachers and our leaders do their work. But we've got to take a look at piece by piece and say, what do we keep? What do we pause? What do we change? What do we eliminate? And it's a tough time to be doing that, because the blueprint has such aspirational goals and rightfully so. And would that we were not in this situation, right? That we could have just kept rolling right along with it. But we are. And so we have to just acknowledge that and acknowledge that everybody's going to come to the table with the best intentions. And that's where I come in. Coming in with the best intentions to try and, bring my experiences, my set of background, my beliefs in what we can get accomplished, and then have those discussions about what we keep and what we change.
Right. Okay, so Dr. Wright, I've taken a lot of your time. We've got friends in the audience who have some things that they would like to say and ask, so let's give them an opportunity with you, okay?
Sure.
Hello, Jacob Bennett, Harford County Council, but also Harford County Public School kindergarten teacher. I'm so glad you brought up that in Mississippi, your students in poverty became the highest performing students in the nation, because I think that is the most crucial accomplishment of your career and definitely worth celebrating and replicating in Maryland. A request, then a question.
Sure.
As we speak about school accountability, I do think in our elementary schools, when we wait to score on third grade, we waited too late. And we know that first grade oral reading fluency is so predictive of third grade MCAP scores. We really need to be using those kindergarten, first grade, second grade universal screeners to hold our elementary schools accountable, and including that in the report card grade, I think, is crucial. My question is, what will the curriculum selection process look like with the literacy policy to ensure that all school districts are using high quality materials? I know as county councilmen and commissioners, we often say, we have to fund these programs, but we have no quality control over what's selected. But this literacy policy is going to be so crucial to making sure that, just like we have an FDA to make sure I take safe vitamins, that we have our own quality control to make sure the materials used in the classroom are high quality. So can you speak to what the curriculum selection process is going to look like with the literacy policy?
Sure. Well, we're in the process now at the department of really vetting a lot of materials, and we're going to be creating a list of what we consider using a variety, not only of just our own vetting, but national vetting of materials, of what we consider high quality instructional materials. And you'll hear the term HQIM mentioned a lot. It's high quality instructional materials. And so we will be developing lists for the districts. And our hope is that they look there first, rather than just, buying something that somebody, wants them to buy. I was a principal. I was approached many times by a variety of vendors who said, this is the best thing since sliced bread. And if you buy from me, I'll throw in whatever. But what we're trying to say is, no, if you're really going to be talking about high quality instructional materials, here's the list you need to be looking at. And we're going to be creating that list for reading and for mathematics. So that's our hope.
Good morning. And Mike Hewitt, County Commissioner of St. Mary's County. I'm just finished my 10th year. I did serve 4 years on the Board of Education. I want to say I'm very inspired by you. I hope you go a long way. You've said two things I think are very important. The first one is reading. I've always believed that reading is a success, or education is the key to success. But the key to successful education is reading. So stay on that. Second thing is accountability. You talked about trying to have these focus groups, whether it be superintendents, CFOs, principals, teachers. Try to add elected officials in.
That's a great idea.
Because many times we're approached, hey, we need more. We have all this pressure from the state, or whether it be whatever it be, the blueprint. And, it's overwhelming to them, but they need partners, and we can be partners. So if you can make that part of your thought processes, I appreciate it.
Thanks for the suggestion. I appreciate that.
Another question back here.
Good morning. My name is Michelle Harrod. I'm with Howard County Schools, and I'm a little nervous because I think I'm going to do my best to ask a question that I think is probably controversial.
Okay.
I'm wondering what your policies and your practices. I agree with the gentleman who spoke just before me. I am inspired by your vision, and you said a lot of things that I am extremely hopeful will make significant changes in our school system. But one of the things I'd like to hear from you is, what do you believe is the impact of the violence that is happening in our schools, and what policies and strategies are you implementing to hold not just our teachers and educators, but our students and our parents accountable for the actions that are taking place? I have a friend, I'll say, that is an elementary school teacher, and just recently she had to monitor an entire kindergarten class for the day because there was a student, a kindergartner, who was creating such disruption to the rest of the students that they were, in my opinion, sheltering in place. So what strategies are you implementing to hold people accountable for that? Those actions?
That's a really good question, and it's really a very important one. I know yesterday when I was in the session, Sean Bolson, who's the superintendent here up front from Harford County, made the comment about the number of children post-COVID, little ones that we are seeing who don't have the self-control that they need. And so we have to recognize that. And we also then have to figure out what kind of help do we need to be providing children in terms of intervention. How can we then use our counselors, our school psychologists, our social workers, pupil personnel workers to work not only with the children, but also with families, because I'm sure the families are having the same kinds of issues at home that come to school. I think that we need to make sure that our teachers are prepared for that, because it is increasing in some areas. And so what kind of professional development do they need in terms of behavior management or de-escalation strategies? I think that if that's not something that you've been taught, or I don't think we're getting a lot of it, to be honest with you, from our educator prep programs. I think it's more content driven at that level than it is the actual practicality of how do I manage a class of 20 to 25 children every day. I think also with we do collect data. And we report that to the legislature. Actually, our report is due December 30th, to be honest with you, on the reportable offenses. And so you get a chance, and that's then posted on our website as well. You get a chance to look across the state and see there has been an increase, I can tell you, in the number of reportable offenses. So that lets me know that I'm going to have to go back and meet with because I just read the report, meet with my team to find out what are we doing in terms of professional learning across the state for teachers if in those certain areas that are spiking. And it's something that's got to be on our radar at all times. I know it's on the superintendent's radar. I know it's on a principal's radar. But some people need help in doing that. It's hard when you've got children that it's beyond their control. I mean, and that's sad to say when you've got a 5-year-old that's out of control, but having a 5-year-old grandson, there's just certain times I know that when he has this little meltdown, he doesn't have the adult coping skills that we do. So how do we help him if he's upset about something, or a child just can't express themselves well? So there's a lot that goes into that. I wish I had a clean answer for you. I just know that it's something that we are monitoring at the department level, and then also trying to provide help out to the schools to train people in better ways to prevent that. And I do think we need to reach parents, because I think parents struggle with this as well. I mean, some parents are able to handle that and others are not. And so that's part of what I think in community outreach and parent engagement, it's not just about the academic side of it, it's also about the behavioral and mental health side of it. And so we are seeing a rise in mental health issues across the state, but that's nationally as well. And so how are we ensuring that the people that are in our schools are also providing the services and they're not being overwhelmed with paperwork, or not being overwhelmed with other jobs, but being given the time to do the jobs that they're supposed to be doing. But it's on our radar. Right. It's on our radar.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for sharing everything that you did. I am happy that you have those target groups that you're working with, but as the other gentleman suggested with elected officials, I would also recommend some type of focus group for the parents, because they're the ones dealing with the issues from their children within the classroom. And as a county official, I hear that frequently about the issues that the parents and the children are facing, and they feel unheard. So that would be another avenue. I also have a controversial question. I'm a council member in Cecil County, and one of the things that we hear every single year from the school system is that they need more money, more money, more money. And I agree that education is the foundation for all of our students. I don't deprive any of them from receiving the best education that they can. However, you made a statement that money doesn't always solve the problem, and therefore we have to find solutions to work around the problems that we are facing without adding additional funding, without raising taxes on our taxpayers. I recently saw a graph of funding within the state of Maryland where administration is top heavy and teachers' salaries and benefits are at the bottom of the graph. So in my opinion, there is definitely a disparity when it comes to the teachers and what they need. So I would like you to speak to how can we solve this problem of having a top-heavy administration when we have large classrooms, teachers struggling, the disruptions from even the youngest children. And what I'm hearing from a lot of people is that the problems with behaviors are coming from the kindergarten students, the elementary students, and the middle school students. So I would just kind of like to hear your thoughts on the spending issues and where you see this going and how we can kind of control and move those fundings accordingly so that the teachers have the support and the help they need within the classrooms without jacking up our taxes and increasing our budget significantly.
Okay. So two things. One thing that I didn't mention before, in doing the deep dives that I did with the superintendents and their CFOs, the foundation formula has not kept up with inflation. And so the superintendents, when you have a foundation formula that it supposed to be paying for the foundational parts of what is in education, that is not kept up with inflation. And so superintendents are having then to look for monies in other areas to cover the cost of not only what the foundation would pay for. Oops, there we go. But also transportation costs have gone up. Health costs have gone up. And so all of that has to be baked in to their local budgets. So that became very clear to me through all three different scenarios that I was looking at from the superintendents. So that's got to be taken into consideration when you are looking at trying to pay for the overall education, because if you have an HVAC system that goes up, you got to have some kind of set aside to replace that, as you well know. And so I think that part of what you can, in the conversation that you're having with your superintendent, would be to say, to take a look at what actually is happening inside that budget. Because when you take a look at what's happening inside that budget, you'll know that they're stretched pretty thin when it comes to trying to cover all of the costs that are continuing to rise. I think that and also what you're counting as administration. That's another, how that is getting defined may be different from county to county. And so I think that if you're looking at strictly just central office, because sometimes that what gets counted into that, it's also principals can get counted into that, assistant principals can get counted into that. So you've got to be very clear about how the definition of administration is being defined. It could be that the county may be, in the case of the woman from Howard County is saying, they say, I may be hiring 2 extra, behavioral management people because I've got this issue. But where do they fall in? Because they're not really school-based. I mean, they could be central office-based and deployed out to those schools. So it's not a simple thing unless you're really actually looking at it school by school, person by person, and how those things are defined. And that all rolls into this whole conversation around blueprint. It's all intertwined, and that's really the reason that I started having these conversations and these deep dives with the superintendents. Was they kept saying we don't have enough in the foundation formula, and when you actually start looking at how they're deploying their money, they're right. They're having to use other monies to cover those monies, and so it's a complicated. This is a complicated answer because it's a complicated problem, and it's really got to be looked at, district by district. It really does. Yeah.
Okay, we're running into the end of our time. We have time for one last question. Council member, bring us home.
Councilman Mike Detmer, Dorchester County. I'm so grateful for this fireside chat. It's been so informative. I really am so heartened by hearing that you view it as a calling, and that your calling is to help our greatest natural resource, which is our kids and our future. It is their lives, and I'm so appreciative. I believe in you, and I believe in Dr. Jamil Thompson here in Dorchester County. The bad news is that so much of what I've heard and so much of what we talk about is not just overcoming the obstacles that the kids in Choptank Elementary face, which are some are very, very steep obstacles, but it's almost like we're trying to overcome the blueprint now. Like that's an obstacle for us. I heard in a session yesterday, multiple speakers, flexibility is key. I heard in a Bay Restoration about the value of sandboxing. So what's the best way for me as an individual councilman, not asking a political question? I don't want Blueprint to be a political football. I care about the kids in Choptank Elementary and Sandy Hill and Warwick. That's what I care about. So what's the best way for me to support you and Dr. Thompson having the best flexibility that they need to adapt many of the good recommendations that the Kerwin Commission gave us?
I think being a good listener is a good place to start. I think that being in those conversations is really important. I think the more that you can learn and understand about the issues that Dr. Thompson is facing here in Dorchester, and knowing what his needs are, because it's going to be very different than what the Howard County needs are. And I think that we've got to be considering that flexibility, and it's going to look different at every district. This is not a one size fits all issue. And I think that's the part of, I think what you're hearing from the superintendents around flexibility. I mean, it's just not, because the needs are so, so different. I mean, I've been out in Allegheny County and Washington County, and I've been in MACo, I've been in Caroline, I've been in the needs are very different. So we have to really take this on, I believe, even the aspects within the blueprint. I think we have to step back and say, what does that look like in Dorchester? What does that look like in Harford County? What does that look like in Montgomery County? I mean, that you're talking 165, 170,000 kids. So that's a lot different than it would be in Dorchester. And so the needs are different. And I think in order to meet the needs of children, you're going to have to really be involved in those conversations and sitting down with your superintendent and listening to the board and what the board is having to say about some of the decisions that they're making. The more informed you are, the better a partner you can be.
So friends, thanks very much for joining us for an hour this morning. Most of all, thanks very much to Dr. Wright for spending her time. We got big policy ahead of us on education. It's an investment we can't afford to miss. If you take the astronomy class, you need someone at the front of the class to point to the sky and say, that's the North Star. This is who I want, telling everybody in Maryland, that's the North Star.
Thank you.
Thanks for taking the time and joining us this morning. A round, please.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for joining us again on the Conduit Street Podcast, and please follow us on social media. Subscribe to the podcast to get every episode. We know you want to. And don't forget that 5-star review, which helps other people find their way to us. I'm Chantel Malcolm Lim signing off, and for Michael Sanderson, we will talk to you soon.